Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball.
We're really excited to bring you talks that we recorded as part of the CANUCS Surgical Fellows course. CANUCS is a national organization that stands for Canadian Collaborative on Urgent Care Surgery, and they've been doing some amazing work in understanding emergency general surgery and trauma in Canada. Dr. Chad Ball and Dr. Kelly Vogt were instrumental in bringing together some really fantastic speakers back in April of 2024 to talk about the critical knowledge and skills that surround obtaining a staff job, as well as being successful both personally and professionally in a demanding career. This was a really fabulous course aimed at surgical fellows. Dr. Kelly Vogt is an acute care and trauma surgeon at Western University in London, Ontario, and is an outstanding surgeon scientist. Dr. Vogt lays out her advice in this talk for starting a career in research as a surgeon, and how to navigate everything from involving trainees in your research projects to writing your first grant. She's a longstanding friend of the Cold Steel podcast, and you can check out all the other episodes we've done with Dr. Vogt in the show notes.
I'm excited to share with you my perspectives on getting started with research today. No disclosures, but I do think, and I put it out there right at the beginning, the kids are in the first slide, I think important to know sort of who I am and where I'm coming from. I told you I'm the chair of the Canadian Collaborative on Urgent Care Surgery. I'm a clinician scientist. I have a practice in trauma and emergency general surgery. I do lots of research. I chair research for our residents, so I talk to them about this. I have amazing colleagues, and I come from London, Ontario. And I'm also a mom. And I think that's actually really central to the conversations we're going to have. And I'm a wife to another surgeon. And so all of that, I think, informs the conversations that we're going to have today. So I think when you make that transition, it's such an exciting time. And, acknowledging that this is a fellows course, most of you are going to end up in a situation where you're in an academic position. And it feels so great to think about being in that operating room, finally being the leader, not having to listen to what your stupid staff are telling you that you think is dumb and you don't want to do, and you finally get to be in charge. We're not going to talk about that right now. We are going to talk about this part, which is the other scholarly deliverables that come with that type of practice. And it certainly varies depending on what your practice looks like. This is my daughter on my computer in my office last week. She's very cute, so you may be looking forward to that. But what you're probably not looking forward to, and maybe not even entirely aware of, is all the time that you actually have to spend meeting those scholarly activity deliverables. So as you think about taking on a practice and getting started and what your job is, I implore you at this stage, when you're looking for the job or starting in your contract negotiations, to really try to understand from an academic standpoint what you actually need to do. What's required of you? How long do you have to achieve it? And really importantly, in a time when you maybe have a little bit more leverage than you will once you've signed that contract, how are the people, the system around you going to support you to be able to achieve those objectives? And that's in things like, is there time set aside for your scholarly work? Is there money that comes with the contract, signing bonuses, opportunities for additional information, work, resources, human resources, and others? So thinking about what you need to do and how you need to get there, and what things are there to support you as you do it. And for me, so for us in London, this is our academic role category, tremendously important. And likely in any job, you're going to have some version of this that says, here's your job, here's what we expect of you. So this document is numerous pages and says for me as a clinician scientist, I'm expected annually to write X number of papers and get X number of grants. And then for us at Western, and this is likely no different in various versions across the country and across the world, really, if I meet those deliverables in 7 years, I expect to be able to be promoted to associate professor. And so understanding that, and I love Dr. Leeper, who had his version of the academic role category posted on the back of his door, highlighted. And then, as I said, I'm circling back to something else I said before, understanding who's around to help you in achieving those deliverables. There's 3 massively important pictures up there that are relevant to me. The top picture there is Dr. Ken Leslie. He was the chair chief of general surgery when I took my first job. And in London, we didn't hire clinician scientists in the division of general surgery. That was not a thing, with 75% time for research and expectations. But what, Dr. Leslie will tell you, he is not a researcher and his brain doesn't work that way. But what he will also tell you is he knows how important it is, and it is so important to support the people. There's not a bigger champion in my career for the academic work that I've done in London than Ken Leslie. And he built in some resources within the limits of what he could, but the amount of support that he's provided for my academic career is tremendous. The second picture there is familiar from the back of the room, and it really talks about having mentors and supporters who have done what you want to do. It is a daunting task to feel like you want to be Chad one day. It is a tremendous and probably insurmountable milestone. But to have someone in your corner who's supporting, who's promoting, and who's mentoring you through that work, and it doesn't have to be someone whose office is in the same hallway as yours, And London, we have a ton of strengths, and historically, academic productivity wasn't one of them, at least in the clinical research realm. So to find people like Chad and Morad and other individuals who work in the field that you do, but who also can provide you with a little bit of a roadmap and the support you need at the higher levels to be successful is so important. And then the last person on there is Laura Allen. She is my right hand, left hand, left and right foot. She's my research coordinator, and she has built the program with me from the day that I started. I was fortunate enough in my admission package to get a little bit of infrastructure support for my research program, which allowed me to pay her salary for the first 2 years and then continue to figure out how to pay that every year. She does all the stuff that I don't want to do. She helps me with the REBs. She liaises with the Research Institute. But most importantly, for someone who has no medical training, she's been a fixture in our research program and now actually can write her own paper on acute care surgery because she understands it so well. I write the discussion. She does all the rest of it. And that's invaluable to me. And then you make that person, if you can, an indispensable resource to others around. So she also helps me coordinate our resident research program so the residents can come to her with their questions, which is, I think, tremendously useful. Not everybody is lucky enough to have a Laura, but if you can find one, hold on tight. Really important when we think about how we balance the career. What makes you as a clinician scientist or a clinician researcher valuable is that you are a clinician. It gives you an opportunity to be on the ground to identify what things we need to figure out. What are the questions that need to be asked and the patience by which we can answer those questions. The struggle is that it's really hard to do 2 things at the same time. It's really hard to be a busy clinician focusing on the individual patient and doing the research at the same time. I don't know, everybody's a little bit different, but for me, I can't do research 5 minutes at a time in between cases. I need to find a way to block off time. And so what is the concept? First of all, is there protected time? And then more importantly, how are you going to protect that time to be able to meet those deliverables? Because the reality is this, as a clinician, it's always more important to be doing the clinical work. And it certainly feels that way in the moment. Your pager goes off, so-and-so's bleeding, or your pager goes off and the family wants to talk to you, or your trainees need an education session. The clinical piece is so all-encompassing. And it certainly feels like, it's really hard to say no to that so I can sit in my office and do another paper. And so finding strategies to make sure that you can protect that time, carve out that time, or further the academic mission become really important in the context of the clinical demands that are really just so ever present. Tips that have worked for me and may or may not work for you. The first is to know what works for you. For me, that's dedicated time and blocks of time. And so it really speaks to that second point, carving out time to do it. It took me 3 years into my practice to be able to speak to my admin partner and say, can you just not schedule me meetings or anything on Thursdays? Put it in my calendar as research time, and that's protected time, because it's so easy to, well, I'm not doing anything today, meaning I'm not doing anything clinical today. So I can say yes to that teaching session. It's only an hour. I'll be able to get the research done in the other 6 hours I'm in my office. It doesn't work that way in reality until you make it a physical priority or some reminder to yourself that in fact this is time you need to spend on your research work. It becomes difficult to do that. So whether this is the strategy or something else, mentally or physically blocking off that time can be really useful. I meant to take a picture of my office, but I didn't do it before I traveled. I have on my office wall, like a board of all the work that's happening, like, to do, no, she's seen it lots of times, lists of things that are due that I'm working on, which help keep me accountable. Not so much in my phone, because I use my phone a lot, but really sitting in front of my face. So every time I sit down on the computer, it's like, oh, I didn't actually finish that, data analysis or whatever I was supposed to do. So that helps to keep me accountable. And then also figuring out what the accountability framework is. Most people will start with some sort of mentorship committee or some group of individuals who's tasked with trying to keep you on track. For me, the CANUCS meetings are a huge bonus because every month I have to report out on the deliverables of the academic work of that group. Whatever it is for you, your mentor or yourself, finding a way to be accountable and following up with that helps you from getting 6 months down the road and saying, yeah, I kept meaning to do that next week and next week and next week, and now we're 6 months later and I haven't done it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. So the question was, what do you do with your phone in the times that you're busy and you're in that protected research time, you're in that research bubble? How do you manage the phone, the text, the incoming information? The first short answer to that is not well. And it goes back to the first slide, which is I'm a mom. And really, historically, I did that. I would turn off my phone. I had my pager, which was a different thing, not my phone. Now my phone is my pager, so that complicates things. But, and I could turn off my phone. But now I can't, I don't have that luxury anymore. It's the reason I bought this, and I'm holding my arm to show my Apple Watch, because that to me is the trick. So the watch, for this reason and at home reasons, becomes an extension of my phone, except I can't get all the detail and it's really annoying to respond. So when it rings, I check it and I see, is it my kid's school? Is it my husband telling me that something is going on? Or is it something that can wait? And if it's something that can wait, I try, I'm not always successful, to let it wait. And my phone sits in a different part of my office on my windowsill so that I have to get up to actually access it, which is, a minor barrier, but a barrier nonetheless, close enough. So, that's the best I've been able to achieve, but it's massively disruptive, all of the information. And when, my admin partners and Laura don't bother me, the door is shut. So at least those pieces kind of help, but the rest of the world doesn't know that I'm in the middle of writing a paper. So I will tell you that I know myself well enough to know that I am not productive in the same way at midnight as I am at 8 a.m. In fact, I can tell you I'm not as productive at 2 p.m. as I am at 8 a.m. or at 4:30 a.m., but that has a different role. So that's part of knowing, who you are and when is that time that you can actually. So we have an orthopedic surgeon who works in our hospital, and he does academic work basically every morning from 5 to 6 a.m. That's how it works for him, and everybody has their structure. You just got to know yourself well enough to figure out how to incorporate it into what your life looks like. And maybe train your kids not to wake up so damn early. Some of the publications from my first year of being on faculty. And as I said before, we never had a clinician scientist in the Division of General Surgery before. And that made me a fairly hot commodity when I came back on staff. And what these papers have in common is that they actually have basically nothing to do with the work I do. They are projects that individuals that I was working with wanted to bring me in as part of, which I'm extremely grateful for, to help them, to mentor them, to provide them with guidance, to do the work in some cases, for a whole bunch of publications, which are great lines on my CV, but actually don't help me with kind of what we're going to talk about next, which is my own research program. And I think the sooner you can figure this out in your academic career, the better. Often that blank slate in the top corner is where you'll start. And that's because as trainees, you do the work that your supervisors want you to do. You are helping contribute to their program of research, and you are happy to do it most of the time because that's part of the, mentorship model by which we train. Now it's your turn to figure out what exactly it is that's going to be your thing and build your research around that. It's your niche, it's your focus, and it allows you, it's actually a reasonably predictable pathway. It's the doing the retrospective case series and the chart review and the systematic review and the meta-analysis and the small pilot trials all on the same topic, which leads you to become the national or international expert in whatever field it is. And that can be broad. When people ask what my research program is, it's health services and clinical epidemiology in trauma and emergency general surgery. Like, that is a massively broad program. I would not suggest you do that. But if your program of research is in, for example, surgical simulation in trauma, every time Dr. Leeper goes to write a paper, the background's already done. He's the world expert on, that particular system. And I joke, like, I have other programs that are evolving and that are not quite so broad. But whatever it is, it provides you efficiencies in your research work and also allows you to meet those other important objectives in your scholarly career, being the person who's invited to give the talk on X, Y, or Z, or the, person at meetings that people want the opinion on. It really matters in terms of doing that. And so that's a good way to sort of think efficiently about it. And so as you're thinking about your program, I really encourage you, because the times that you don't want to work, this is what's going to get you working. Pick something that's interesting to you, that you have access to the clinical patients. In London, Ontario, no matter if, for example, resuscitative thoracotomy was my most interesting area of research, we do a dozen of those a year, and that's a lot more than we used to do. It's not a smart choice for me to choose a program of research that doesn't align with kind of my clinical world. And so I would encourage that for sure. Start small, align your work, and then figure out what the ultimate why is. Where's the area that we really do need to make a big difference, and see how you can move forward to achieve those objectives. It would be nice if all the research came for free, but it doesn't. So one of the key things to start thinking about very early on is how you're going to fund your research program. And so that varies. There's lots of ways to sort of achieve your funding, including as part of your initial recruitment or your initial offer. Some people will get a little bit of, as I said, I got some administrative funds. So great if you can achieve some startup funds. And if you have a significant portion of your deliverables tied to your academic work, I would strongly encourage you to advocate for that even before you get hired. But that's the minority of surgeons. And so in reality, you're going to be looking for grant funding to support your work. Most institutions have internal research grants. And in many institutions, those are really targeted to early career researchers or in your first few years of practice. And they're a really important step in terms of establishing a record of funding, establishing a track record. And if you look at, you tend to be a little bit less competitive because there's a pot of money for a very reasonably defined number of surgeons. Similarly, regionally, so if there's provincial funding, for example, in Ontario, we have a provincial organization that funds some research. So those are good options too. And then your specialty societies. I put up a picture here of the Canadian Association of General Surgeons operating grant funds, which are designated again for early career researchers. And depending on where you work, heart and stroke has tons of money. So if you can sort of align the work that you're doing with heart and stroke, you may have more success than if you're Trauma Association of Canada has no research money. So it depends a little bit on where your area of focus is. And then also national and partnerships with industry are really good ways. But the reality is you're not going to be competitive for a CIHR funding or other national funding initially. And so you need to start building your program through some of these sort of smaller means, little bits here and there. I think what's not up there too is another option if your research or your hospital foundation has a research funding arm. It's a great option for small pilot work. And remember that as you start, you have the golden ticket. There is proportionately substantially more funding earmarked for early career researchers than there is for mid, and there's basically no funding for mid-career researchers and slightly more for sort of more established researchers. So in that time, when you're really busy building your clinical practice, dealing with all the stresses Dr. Leeper was talking about, trying to get your feet wet, you also have to be focusing on that piece of information that's going to achieve these early career research awards, because your time is limited to do those. Sometimes it's 5-7 years. So you have a little bit of time and you should take advantage of it. But I think this is a really important piece. This is a second submission to CIHR we put in for one of our programs of research. The slides are too small. If you read all of these comments, strengths and weaknesses, every single one is a strength. This is a successful pilot, well-designed, simple trial, common injury, good recruitment, established management associated with known morbidity, good rationale, excellent study team, sites already signed up, very well written proposal, rejected. And what is going to happen in your reality, particularly as it comes to funding, the number of times you apply for grants that get rejected is going to be way more than the number of times you get funded. The cool thing is that you can modify that. This was CIHR. We're resubmitting it to PSI, the provincial organization in Ontario. You've done all the work. Just keep trying. Eventually, we will get this trial done. I'm quite convinced. Acknowledging the role of others, I called out some specific individuals, but this is actually a bit of an old representation of the Canadian Collaborative on Urgent Care Surgery, which is individuals from across the country who are working towards the same aim. We work in the same space, and real kudos to Chad and Morad sitting in the back for and Sandy Witter, who's not with us here today, for the initiation of this collaborative group that kind of formed organically from numerous others. This is just a group of people who are interested in this realm, who are interested in emergency general surgery and trauma care or urgent care surgery, who work together, who pool our resources for an outcome that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that is so important when you think about what you're doing. And I said it before, find individuals who are like you or who are doing things that are like you. We use this collaboration to be able to advance the field in a better way. I do want to caution you, though, when you think about collaboration, because it is tremendously important. It is the way forward for our patients and for our specialty. That being said, at present, the metrics of success by which you are judged don't always align with collaboration. And so be mindful that, similar to all those papers that, didn't really align with my own research program, you want to pick collaborative efforts that are worth it for you, that are in a field that's useful for you, that you will also individually be able to take something from. That screenshot there is the guidelines for authorship on multi-center studies that the Canadian Collaborative on Urgent Care Surgery has. And something like that, ensuring that at the outset you understand what's required of you and what you will get in return. If you're going to be a named author on that paper and you're going to have the opportunity to be high up in that author list or whatever it is, that's something that's different than if you're going to be acknowledged in the acknowledgements of a paper for, expecting to do the same amount of work. So be clear about what the expectation is and what the outcome of that expectation will be on the other end. A brief word about working with trainees. I remember, and I would bet that you guys in the room were the trainees who you got a research project handed to you and you just did all the work and you published the paper. I think that is an amazing model when it works. What I will tell you is that I work with a lot of trainees, and some of them are exceptional and they enhance my research program, and some of them are exceptional and take me way more time than they are worth in the ultimate outcome. And so as you think about engaging with trainees, it can be extremely rewarding. It is often required, and sometimes it can be really challenging. My interactions with trainees and their research have definitely changed in the 10 years of my practice from, handing them an idea and expecting them to produce something to me to little pieces of clear deliverables with clear outlines and expectations of what they'll get in return. If you do X, you can be first author on this publication. If you don't do X, you can be in the publication, but Laura's going to be the first author or whatever it is that we're going to work out. So I think being critical and mindful of the way that you interact with the trainees, and I wish I had known that 10 years ago. So in summary, for those of you working in academic centers, research or other scholarly activity will be a tremendously important part of your career. And then finding the time to achieve those objectives can be difficult, but it's tremendously important to think critically about as you start. Some ways to maximize your productivity include ensuring that you find your program of research, what you're interested in, apply for grants, and really strategically collaborate and work with those around you. So I'm happy to take any questions.
I come from Saudi Arabia and I did my residency there. We do have electives that I chose to take all in surgical subspecialties. So I didn't have like a full research block. And I think looking back retrospectively, I think it was important because, as you said, having a protective time to finish a research is something very useful and good even for my future as a staff. So I wanted to ask you, do you think it's useful for me, like a fellow who's going to finish her fellowship soon and be a junior staff? Do you think it's useful to take like a year off clinical work as a surgeon and take, for example, a master's in research? Or is it something that can be done together, like work as a clinician and a surgeon and then work in a research on the side or get an official degree?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mean, the answer is it depends on your job, I think. So I think if the expectation is that you're going to be a clinician scientist or a significant contributor from a research perspective, I do think it's hard to achieve actually the funding milestones without a degree. People look for some formal research training in order to, and again, acknowledging that I don't know the funding structure in your country very well, at least in North America, it's quite common for the individual who's had advanced research training to be more successful in their kind of granting area. That being said, locally, there's lots of examples of individuals who contribute substantially to research without that advanced degree. There's also opportunities for, there's programs in Ontario that I can think of that have sort of certificate programs in clinical research that aren't fully masters, but provide you some of the skills that are required to be successful in that regard. I think it's tricky if you haven't done research to just sort of pick it up off the corner of your desk without any of that foundation, but also acknowledging, it's tough to take another year after you've taken a bunch of clinical years to achieve that objective. And if your expected research deliverables is, 20% of your time and one paper a year, it's probably not worth that time away, though it's an individual decision for sure. So the question was, how do you navigate saying no early in your career when people are basically handing you opportunities to do work? And I mean, as evidenced by all those publications, I didn't really know how to do it. So I didn't do it. And I just worked harder on those things, which again, gave me lots of positives for sure. I think that the sooner you can figure out what your program of research is and what your niche is, the easier it becomes. Because I think more now today, certainly than when I started, people, and hopefully your division chairs or your section heads will understand, I really want to help you with this, but it doesn't align with my program of research. And so I can give you X, Y, or Z. I'm happy to have a coffee with you and give you my thoughts on how to move forward in this project or some tips or tricks. Or you can certainly, I'd love to read your manuscript and give you some feedback or your proposal and give you some feedback, but I can't actually be the one to do your analysis, or I can't be the one to recruit patients for your trial or whatever that looks like. It's so important, and harkens back to what Dr. Leeper said about being kind. Like, it actually is really important, and particularly as you're getting established in a new group, you don't want to be the person who's saying, no, I won't do that, but maybe modifying the expectations, under promising what you can do, over delivering on it actually serves you better than spending 5 nights kind of doing the nitty gritty work. And, but I think it is a tricky balance. And sometimes you're going to say yes. Sometimes that really important person in your division is going to say, can you help me do this work? And you're going to say yes, because they're a really important person in your division. And you're going to find time. But if you do that one time less, that might be useful.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you have comments or questions, please email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.